This is Skip with the Widescreen Gaming Forum, and welcome to WSGF Radio, where we take a look at video game soundtracks, particularly video game soundtracks on vinyl. In this episode, we're taking a look at Ori and the Blind Forest, the Definitive Edition. Before we get into the music, let's take a look at the vinyl itself. The vinyl is produced by IM8-Bit with artwork by Aya Kikeda, and the soundtrack is by Gareth Coker. The soundtrack comes on 280 gram vinyl. There's a glow-in-the-dark version, but I have the blue and purple variant. The soundtrack does have the full 25 songs spread across 4 sides. I'm a huge fan of great packaging, and Ori and the Blind Forest delivers. The jacket artwork by Aya Kikeda is wonderful. It has this die-cut flap across the front, revealing the same image behind. The vinyl ships outside of the jacket pocket. Removing that shows more artwork with some glossy spot character printing of Ori and some monsters, overlaying a matte background printing. The discs ship in black inner sleeves. Sides A and B are blue with this circular artwork on the label. Sides C and D are purple with this floral artwork. It really is a beautiful project with nice touches such as the flap and the spot printing. The art style perfectly embraces and enhances the artwork of the game itself. Now on to the music. I reviewed the soundtrack in 3 phases. First, listening before ever playing the game, I wanted to see if the music would stand on its own. Second, I played a few hours of the game to see how the soundtrack fit, at least to see what my initial impressions were. And third, going back to the soundtrack. If I listen separately after playing the game, does it make me think back to the game or the gameplay? Does it evoke an emotional response in that manner? So for part 1, the soundtrack is great. I listened digitally in my car during several long commutes and trips, listening to the album several times in total. The Definitive Edition soundtrack clocks in at almost 1.5 hours. The soundtrack is a mix of grand pieces or movements, melodic instrumentation, and ethereal vocal components. At times it is epic and reminded me of the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Other times it is contemplative, plaintive, or even sprightly. Let's take a look at a few of the first tracks. The main theme starts off with some melodic piano and strings and an ethereal voice. The prologue clocks in at almost 10 minutes. It starts very similar in mood and style to the main theme, but soon diverges into a piece obviously used to tell a story. Around the 2-minute and 20-second mark, it explores new melodic territory. And at almost 4.5 minutes, it tracks into a grandiose movement. Before returning to a more plaintive tone and ending again on a grand scale. The fourth track, Finding Sane, has a great part around 55 seconds that evokes the literal feeling of running through a forest. Very apropos for a game titled Ori and the Blind Forest. I do remember one particular piece starting up while I was driving and thinking, ooh, that's kind of spooky. I looked down at the stereo display and the song title was Through the Darkness. Not a scary piece of music, nothing fit for a horror soundtrack, but the spooky edge of a lush forest inhabited by both cute characters and dangerous creatures. The soundtrack has its own voice, but it's not monotonous. There is plenty of variety within the cohesive fabric being stitched together by Gareth Coker. Part 2. I played about 3 hours worth of Ori and the Blind Forest, enough to get through the lengthy prologue, the basic tutorial, and acquire 3 skill points, the equivalent of leveling up. I played on easy as I usually do. It's a great little platformer with great visuals and lots of charm. It reminds me much more of Rayman than it does Mario. HowLongToBeat.com says the whole thing lasts about 10 to 12 hours, so this is one I'll see through to the end. It natively supports aspect ratios up to 21:9, providing a proper horizontal plus support. Hopefully developers will patch in support for the newer 32:9 super wide displays. The wider aspect support helps with the immersion to this beautifully rendered world. To complement it, the soundtrack perfectly fits the lush painterly visuals of The Blind Forest and the emotional weight of the story. The soundtrack also fits the gameplay style perfectly. So part 3, having played the game, going back to the soundtrack does draw my mind back to the visuals in the game itself. The entire sensory experience, physical gameplay, visuals, and audio are all woven together perfectly. It's hard to separate one from the other. So final thoughts. The soundtrack really is phenomenal. It's available on both Amazon and iTunes, where it's available in 32-track versions, which I think just breaks up the lengthy prologue track. They are each $10 and have consistent 5-star reviews. It's also available on Steam as a $10 DLC for Ori and the Blind Forest, though I can't tell how many tracks are used. Gareth Coker also has additional content in the way of 29 tracks of, quote, additional content on his Bandcamp page. 8 of these tracks appear to take you from the original version of the soundtrack to the definitive edition of the soundtrack. The rest of the music is from trailers, music not used in the original soundtrack, unused or cut music, and music from the original prototype. On the Bandcamp page, where you can download all of this for free or voluntarily pay any amount you want for what Gareth calls, quote, just about all the music content in the game when added to the original album. The additional content is also available on Steam as a free DLC, though I believe you have to purchase the album first. If you'd like the vinyl, the blue-purple option has hit $175 on Discogs with sites on $200 and has gone upwards of $250 on eBay. The glow-in-the-dark version on eBay has just sold for $400. Unless you are a very serious and dedicated collector, spend the $10 for the digital version on your favorite e-tailer or source, and then send some extra coin Gareth Coker's way on his Bandcamp for the additional content. Whatever you do, don't pirate the tunes, go out, support great music, great composers, and great artists legally, and I hope you enjoy this soundtrack.